The night was unnaturally silent, blanketed in a dense fog that clung to the scarred earth like gauze over a wound. Lieutenant Daniel Kovac pressed his back to the cold husk of a destroyed armored vehicle, scanning the ruins of the village through a pair of thermal goggles. Nothing moved, no wildlife, no patrols, not even a breeze to stir the torn rags of curtains in the shattered windows. But the silence itself was a message. Something was deeply wrong. "Movement?" asked Sergeant Elena Moroz, crouched beside him, rifle steady, voice barely above a whisper. Her sharp eyes mirrored his unease. She had always been the one to sense trouble before anyone else, and tonight her instincts were screaming. "Nothing on thermal, but this place—" Daniel paused. "It feels like it's holding its breath." Private Ilya Orlov knelt on the opposite side, his hands trembling as he checked his gear. He was the youngest in the squad, barely 19, still fresh-faced beneath the grime and fear. "I've read about this village," he muttered. "My grandfather said Soviet scientists abandoned it in the 70s after a reactor test went wrong. But the locals talk about something older, something buried." Daniel shot him a glance. "Focus, Private. We're not here for ghost stories." But even he didn't believe his own dismissal. The past 2 weeks had been littered with reports of disappearances, whole squads gone silent. Satellite surveillance showed odd distortions. A recon drone sent over this area simply vanished. Headquarters had ordered a sweep. Identify, secure, report. Simple, on paper. But as the team stepped into the heart of the village, even the dirt seemed reluctant to support their boots. They moved in formation, 5 soldiers in total. Lieutenant Kovac led, followed by Elena, Ilya, and 2 quiet veterans, Lazarenko and Petrov, men who'd survived the worst of Donetsk and Bakhmut. These weren't the kind of men to scare easily, and yet they walked like trespassers. As they passed the remnants of what once was a schoolhouse, Elena froze mid-step. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. This wasn't here yesterday." "What do you mean?" Daniel halted, scanning the decrepit structure. "This building. I marked it. The roof was caved in, now it's intact." Daniel stared. She was right. The building stood strangely whole, as if time had reversed its damage. Its bricks glowed faintly in the moonlight, not repaired, but never broken. An illusion, perhaps, or a trick of the fog. He didn't want to know which. Inside, the hallway was immaculate. Chalk dust still clung to the blackboard. Desks were aligned with military precision. A child's drawing hung from the wall, a crayon sun above a twisted black tree. Then the air changed. Every soldier stopped mid-breath as the hallway dimmed, like shadows creeping under the doors. There was no sound, yet each of them felt it. A pressure behind the eyes, a faint static hum building just below perception. Daniel's radio crackled. Then a voice, not from the team's frequency, whispered through, "It remembers you." Everyone froze. Ilya turned white. Petrov swung his rifle toward the door at the end of the hall, now slightly ajar. Elena slowly turned her head. That wasn't Ukrainian. That was something older. Ruthenian, maybe. Before Daniel could respond, Lazarenko pushed the door open. Beyond was not a classroom, but a staircase descending into the ground. It was impossible. There had been no signs of subterranean structures in the satellite scans. No records, no intel. And yet the steps were worn, the walls marked with ancient scripts and half-burned Soviet insignias. "I'm not going down there," Ilya said, stepping back. Daniel looked at him. "We don't have a choice. We're already inside it, whatever it is." They descended, weapons raised. The passage was narrow and tight, lined with archaic machinery and pipes that throbbed with a low rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. No one spoke. The stairs ended in a chamber. A single glass cylinder stood in the center, shattered at the base. Wires snaked across the walls. A black smear, darker than oil, darker than blood, coated one side of the chamber like it had been clawed from within. Above the cylinder, stenciled letters in Cyrillic read, Project Perun. Bioweapon? Elena whispered. No, said Petrov, who had been staring into the smear. Look closely. That's not just residue. That's movement. The black substance shimmered subtly, swirling like smoke trapped behind glass. Then it twitched. Daniel raised his rifle. The room flickered. Not the lights. The room itself. For a split second, they were standing in a hospital, then a battlefield, then in darkness, beneath stars that did not belong to Earth. Each scene was overlaid, fractured like reflections in broken mirrors. Elena cried out and dropped to her knees, clutching her head. It's inside the walls! It's watching us! It's been watching for years! Ilya! Daniel called, turning. But the private was gone. The squad searched the chamber, but the narrow tunnel showed no exit, no sound of retreat, no signs of a struggle. Daniel stared at the dark smear again. It was wider now. They had come to investigate disappearances. They had found something that defied explanation, that warped reality and memory alike. And now it was clear. The disappearances weren't accidents or acts of war. They were feeding something. The silence returned. Daniel clenched his jaw, hearing his own heartbeat thunder in his ears. We extract now, file what we have, report everything. But deep down, he knew. Whatever they had found had already found them first. And it had no intention of letting them leave untouched. The descent back into the fog-laced village was marked by silence so heavy it pressed against their skin like humidity. Lieutenant Daniel Kovac led the way, his boots crunching over ash and bone chips scattered across the dirt path. Behind him, Elena's breathing had turned shallow, and the usual sharp confidence in her posture had dulled into something wary, bordering on primal. No one spoke of what had happened in the underground chamber. Not yet. The disappearance of Ilya hung over them like a phantom limb, present in every glance and pause. They had seen the darkness move, felt time fracture and reality bend, and now, with one man gone, the village felt more alive and more hostile. They re-established their position near the outskirts, securing a blown-out farmhouse that gave them partial elevation and line of sight to their entry point. Petrov, ever the pragmatic one, immediately began setting up the relay to transmit data back to command. But as he cycled through the frequencies, each one emitted only static, then a burst of whisper-like interference. It sounded almost human, but the cadence was wrong, like something mimicking speech from memory. No signal, sir, Petrov said. It's jamming us, or we're out of sync. Daniel didn't respond. He stared at the fading sun, noting how the shadows lengthened too quickly, as if time was slipping. You think Ilya's dead? Elena asked quietly. I think he's not here, Daniel replied. Not in a way that matters. Lazarenko paced the room. Normally stoic, his agitation was visceral. He kept glancing at the boarded-up windows, muttering half-prayers under his breath. I saw my wife, he said suddenly. Down there. In that flicker. She's been dead 6 years. But she looked at me. She spoke. She asked why I didn't save her. You know that wasn't real, Elena said, though her voice lacked conviction. Does it matter? Lazarenko snapped. If it can show us what we want, or fear, then what part of us is safe? Daniel cut in. Enough. We document. We survive. We warn the next unit not to come. But the problem wasn't warning someone. It was leaving at all. Since re-emerging, the village layout had shifted. Buildings were in new locations. A church now stood where a barn had once been, and none of the GPS signals lined up with their maps. The place was evolving, or worse, aware of their presence and rearranging itself around them. They had stepped into a trap designed not with wires or bombs, but thought and memory. That night, While taking watch, Elena saw movement again. A shape, tall, limber, passed between two houses, leaving no footprints, no heat signature. When she trained her scope, it vanished, but something shimmered faintly in the air where it had stood, like a wrinkle in a page being smoothed by invisible fingers. She didn't wake the others immediately. Instead, she reached for her grandfather's crucifix, the one she'd tucked into her vest out of habit, not faith. Now, her fingers gripped it like it might tether her to something solid. She whispered, "What are you?" A voice answered, not aloud, but in her head, smooth, cold. Not male, not female, it was layered with echoes. "We are the archive, and you are the reader." She jolted up, rifle aimed, but there was nothing, only stillness and the faint smell of ozone. When she finally told the others, they didn't laugh, not this time. Daniel nodded slowly. "It's using us, testing responses, trying to learn." "From our minds?" Petrov asked. "From our pain," Lazarenko muttered. "That's what it reads best." Daniel checked his magazine. "In the morning, we head for the church. That's the only new structure. It wasn't there when we arrived, and I think it's the source." Elena frowned. "Why do you think that?" "Because it wants us to see it," Daniel said. "It's not hiding anymore." Sleep came reluctantly. The night was broken by fragments of memory, visions of past battles, of lost comrades, of choices left to rot in the dark. Each soldier awoke unrested, more fragmented than before. Elena's hands shook as she drank her rationed coffee. Petrov's eyes twitched at sounds no one else heard. By dawn, the fog had lifted slightly, enough to see the church clearly. Its design was alien, built in the shape of a traditional Orthodox structure, but the angles were wrong. The steeple bent inward like it had grown instead of been constructed. Black vines coiled up the walls, pulsing faintly. The bell tower had no bell, only a hole through which a constant low hum poured, like the world's slowest heartbeat. Daniel led them inside. The pews were filled, not with people, but replicas. Waxen copies of the team, dressed in uniform, staring forward with unblinking eyes. Each face held a slight error, an off smile, a third nostril, too many teeth. Elena gasped when she saw one with her face, mouth stretched into a rictus grin. Lazarenko raised his rifle and shot it in the head. The wax cracked, but didn't bleed. Instead, a black mist hissed out and swirled toward the ceiling before disappearing. Daniel walked to the altar. Upon it sat a device, Soviet in design, but fused with something unrecognizable, a glowing orb of fluid suspended in magnetic stasis. Around it were photos, old military units, scientists, strange creatures drawn in frantic ink. One file had Daniel's name on it. He picked it up. Inside were pages of predictions, his childhood trauma, his time at the academy, his loyalty breaks, his death, dated tomorrow. Then a new page printed from the altar itself, sliding out like a tongue from a mouth. It read, "Entry logged. Host assimilation, 68%. Daniel's pulse surged. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." But the church doors slammed shut, and the wax figures began to smile. The light inside the church shifted. It bent like liquid, turning sharp corners and folding around the figures that now surrounded them. Wax doppelgangers with expressions that seemed to morph with each blink. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, sweat tracing down his neck despite the cold. The thing on the altar pulsed faster now, each beat of light echoing with a strange resonance in his chest, as if syncing with his heart. The air was thick with the scent of something metallic and decayed, like rusted blood. "We are not going to die in here," Daniel growled, stepping back toward the center aisle. "We're not becoming them." But the copies began to move, jerkily at first, then more fluid, more human, but still wrong. Their limbs bent at odd angles, heads cocking in ways that defied vertebrae. One bore Lazarenko's face, but had Elena's voice when it spoke. You brought the signal. You carried the seed. This place is not a tomb. It's a hatchery. Petrov aimed and fired. The bullet tore through the mimic's chest, but instead of falling, it let out a warbled shriek and dissolved into black threads that writhed across the floor, seeking warmth. The team moved in tandem, falling back toward the vestibule, stepping over rows of broken pews and flickering symbols carved into the floor, symbols that hadn't been there minutes before. We can't fight them all, Elena said through gritted teeth, covering their flank. They don't die. They just reform. Daniel's eyes darted to the orb at the altar. Then we take out the source. As if it heard him, the orb pulsed once, then flared white-hot. The walls shuddered. A high-pitched tone pierced the air, sending everyone to their knees. Visions slammed into their minds, memories not their own. Cities crumbling beneath alien skies, creatures whispering code into machines made of bone. A blueprint of Earth's future sketched in DNA and fire. Do you see it? Elena gasped, eyes wide with tears. This isn't just a weapon. It's intelligence. It's rewriting reality. Then we give it nothing else to write on, Daniel hissed, standing. Cover me! He sprinted toward the altar, unloading his rifle into the pulsing orb. The bullets hit something dense, like firing into gelatin, but with each shot, the glow dimmed. Petrov flanked left and hurled an incendiary charge, the flame licking up the vines that coiled across the ceiling like veins. The church screamed, deep, inhuman, as if the building itself were alive and wounded. The wax figures flailed, began to melt, shrieking in distorted echoes of the team's voices. You are us. We are you. We were always here. Lazarenko charged with a bayonet, stabbing one through its throat. Not today, he spat. Daniel reached the altar and slammed the butt of his rifle into the orb. With a final crack, it burst, light and sound erupting outward like a pressure bomb. The church buckled, its structure warping in a slow-motion collapse. Out! Daniel bellowed. They sprinted through the warped doorway just as the steeple imploded, sending shards of twisted iron into the mist-choked air. Behind them, the church dissolved, not in flame, but like paper turning to ash from the inside out. The mist drew back, evaporating, and the village began to reassemble itself into what it once was. Broken, yes, but no longer shifting, no longer watching. The air cleared. For the first time in days, birdsong returned. The sky, still gray, no longer pulsed. They stood in the open road, gasping, bleeding, but alive. Daniel dropped to one knee, checking his vitals. The static in his ears had stopped. Whatever intelligence had infected that place, it was severed for now. Petrov leaned on a cracked stone wall, hands trembling. Elena stared at the spot where the church had been, lips moving in a silent prayer. Was it alien? She asked finally. Daniel looked at her, then the sky. Maybe, maybe not. Could have been human tech that evolved. Could have been a god we built by mistake. All I know is it wanted us to become it. And Ilya? Lazarenko's voice cracked. They were silent for a long time. He's gone, Daniel said at last. Or maybe absorbed. But we're not letting it happen again. They started the trek back toward the evac point. Their boots now fell on solid ground. The signal returned, weak but stable. As they climbed a ridge, Daniel looked back one last time. The village was still again, as if none of it had happened. But deep in the earth, something still pulsed, watching, waiting. He turned away. The war was far from over.